What's up everyone? In this video I'm going to talk about the Nikon D3200 and see if it's still a good camera in 2024, 2025 and so on. The Nikon D3200 was released in the summer of 2012. This makes this camera a little over 12 years old now, and it was released about 20 months right after the D3100. But don't let the age of this camera fool you. It's still an amazing camera, especially if you're just starting out, and it's one of the reasons why I would really recommend this camera, especially if you're brand new to photography or if you're on a budget. In this video I'm going to talk about the differences between the D3200 and the D3100, and I'm going to talk about the specs on the D3200 and what I like about it and what I don't like about it. When it was released, it was $700 brand new with the lens, and now you can find one of these for well under $150 just for the body, depending on the condition it's in though. The D3200 was released right when the mirrorless cameras got really popular too, but it still stood its ground just because of the really great image quality, the amount of lenses it has, and the handling. So let's take a look at the D3200 specs. It has a 24 megapixel CMOS sensor. It is a crop sensor camera. It has an ISO range between 100 to 6400 with a boost up to 12,800. The only downside with this is that it goes from 800 to 1600. So you don't have the ISO range between 800 to 1600. It just goes from 800 to 1600. It's the only downside with the ISO range, but other than that, I think at ISO 1600 is still really usable. It has a 3-inch LCD screen, it has a full HD 1080 video recording, it can shoot up to 4 FPS, and it has one memory card slot. There's a lot more pros than cons, but more of the cons that I have with the camera is just more nitpicking. And one of the cons about the D3200 is the video's autofocus. It's pretty bad. I would not rely on it for professional work or if you're trying to record fast moving subjects. This camera also does not have Wi-Fi or Bluetooth built in. You will need a Nikon W1A to utilize the Wi-Fi connection, but that's something that you would have to put onto the camera. This camera, the Nikon D3200, does not have Wi-Fi or Bluetooth built in. Some may say that it's a con, it's just the one memory card slot. For me personally, I don't think it's a major deal breaker. A lot of people have been fine with one memory card slot, but if you're doing a lot of photos, I think a bigger memory card like a 64 gigabyte or even a 32 gigabyte is more than enough, especially on the D3200. I'm using a 16 gigabyte memory card, and I think that's more than enough if I'm just bringing this to a weekend trip or just somewhere where I want to take pictures. But if you want to do more, pop in a 64 gigabyte memory card. Another con that I think a lot of people might not like about this camera is the no live preview. So for example, if you're making a change with the aperture, you won't see the aperture change. You will need to switch back to LCD view, change the aperture, then go back to live view mode to make that change. I know that with the shutter speed you can see the live preview change when you're switching the shutter speed and the ISO, but with the aperture you cannot. That's the only downside in the live view mode. That's one of the downsides of the D3200's video. Another one is just the dedicated ISO button. You can set up the ISO button in the FN button control settings to have a dedicated ISO button, which makes sense. It is just a entry-level camera, so if you're just learning, this camera is still great, and if you want to change more buttons just the way you like it, the D3200 has that option. And like I said earlier, their pros outweigh the cons. The cons are just more nitpicking. But if you're really thinking about doing videos, I would not rely on this camera to do videos. But if you're looking for a camera that will do photography, the D3200 is a solid contender for getting really good image quality. So what are the main differences between the D3100 and the D3200? There's a lot. I'll just have this chart right here. I'm going to show it right here. The differences between the D3100 and D3200. First off, the megapixels. The D3100 has 14.2 megapixels, whereas the D3200 has 24 megapixels. And one of the reasons for the increase in megapixels is the D3200's or upgraded image processor. The image processor is basically like the brains of the cameras. It handles how fast the camera can process images, manage high ISO grain, and how the camera performs in low light situations. So the D3200 has the XSpeed 3 processor, and the D3100 has the XSpeed 2 image processor. This is one of the reasons why the D3200 has 24 megapixels versus the D3100's 14.2 megapixel. Both of them have 11 autofocus points. The D3200 does have a higher ISO range. The D3200 does 100 to 6400, whereas the D3100 has an ISO range from 100 to 3200, but D3200's ISO boost is a lot higher at 12,800 versus the 3100's 6400, I believe. And the D3200 has more video performance options as well. Not that much compared to the D3100, but the D3200, you can record 1080 footage at 30, 25, and 24 FPS. And you also have the option of shooting 1280 by 720 at 60 FPS or 50 FPS. whereas the D3100, you can only shoot at 1080 at 24 FPS. The D3100's continuous shooting is 3 FPS, whereas the 3200 is at 4 FPS. So if you want a camera that can shoot slightly faster, the D3200 is probably a better choice. And another great upgrade that the D3200 has compared to the D3100 is the LCD screen resolution. The LCD resolution on the D3100 is 230,000 dots versus the D3200's much improved 921,000 dots on their LCD screen. So if you're looking through the images, it is definitely a lot better compared to the D3100. For the battery life, they're about the same, 550 shots. I haven't really tested out both cameras to see what max they can get, but I do know that if you are shooting in live mode on both cameras, they do drain the batteries really fast. So just be wary that if you are using live view, most of the time it will drain the battery. Both also have the guide mode, and we'll get back to that pretty soon here too. So let's talk about the image quality too. It's one of the highlights of the D3200, and I think this is where the camera really shines too. When it was released, it was Nikon's highest resolution crop sensor camera, and as with most cameras, if you put a decent lens on it, you will see image quality improve. My favorite lens on the D3200 is actually the Tamron 45 1.8, but if you're starting out and you need a versatile lens, the 18-200 VR is a very fun lens to use, especially if you can find one for well under $100 now. I bought my 18-200 for right about $100 used, and it wasn't in the prettiest shape, but if you want to learn more about it, I did do a review on my channel, so you can check that out. And just to add about the ISO improvements, it's actually not that bad. I think it's just a little better than the D5100s, but really major thanks to that XB3 image processor, because the high ISO range is definitely usable. I would say right at ISO 3200 or above, then it starts getting pretty grainy. But for a 24 megapixel sensor, it's not too bad at all. And just a tip, if you are taking photos in a very low light situation, make sure the subject you're photographing does have a light source. Every camera will struggle in very low light situations, so it's difficult to say how good this camera will focus in low light just because of, you know, the light situations, how much light you're working with, what type of light it is. There's a lot of factors that really roll into autofocusing in very low light situations. For weddings, I don't know if I would trust this camera. I think it would be okay, but it's one camera that I still wouldn't use. But if you're just doing like weekend travels, portraits, family events, I think this camera is more than enough for that type of photography. And let's talk about the D3200's video. I know that I did nitpick about how bad the autofocus performance is, but it does have some autofocus modes that could help you. But from my experience, it didn't help me, especially if I'm trying to record a fast moving subject. The autofocus is definitely not even close to my Nikon Z50's autofocus performance. It's just a little better than the D3100s. Here's an example with the D3200 video autofocus here. And the D3200 does have different AF modes. It has the face priority, wide area AF, normal area autofocus, and subject tracking autofocus. And also, if you didn't hear it already, just be wary that if you are using a Nikon f-mount lens, you will hear that autofocus when you're recording footage in a very quiet area. While the D3200's video autofocus modes are helpful, it's definitely behind in terms of today's video autofocus performance. I think it's more than enough for basic video recording. So if you're recording a birthday event, family event, or something like that, something that's very calm, very natural, nature, it's fine. But if you're trying to record fast moving subjects like sports, automotive, wedding events, I would not trust this camera. If you're doing music videos, it just depends what kind of videos you're shooting. If that's a fast moving subject in your music video, I wouldn't trust it. But if you're just getting B-roll, it's not too bad. So overall, is the Nikon D3200 still a solid camera to get? Yes, it is. Despite its subpar video performance, it really does shine in the image quality. The improved image processor from the D3200 definitely surpasses the D3100 in terms of overall performance. The low light performance is great, and I think the image quality with a high ISO grain isn't too bad at all. It's definitely workable. Also, the LCD screen really helps too. Mine is showing a little bit of a yellow tint, but I'm not surprised because of its age, but just be worried that with the older camera, some of these LCD screens can give you a different tone. All you just have to do is just, make sure to use that image that you're taking a picture of as a reference. And also the live view is a lot better compared to the D3100 too. I do like the D3200's live view performance compared to the D3100's. It's a lot snappier compared to the D3100. It does have face detection, but it is very laggy. It is not fast at all. And also, if you are using the face detection on the D3200, D3200, it does, from my experience, drain out a lot of battery. So I would definitely stick to the optical viewfinder if you can. Also, from my experience, the autofocus with the live view isn't that accurate as well. It does take a little bit of time to focus on your subject. And sometimes it won't even autofocus. Like here, it just, you know, you're trying to focus and it just does not catch focus, especially if you're in a lower light situation. So this camera is an excellent camera for beginners too, especially with this guide mode. If you're brand new to photography and you're looking to learn more about cameras, the guide mode really does help you learn the camera and camera settings. I wish my old Nikon D40 had this guide mode because it would have been fabulous to have when I was learning, you know, different camera settings like shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, and, you know, the different image formats like JPEG and RAW and, you know, JPEG fine, JPEG basic. All of that would have been perfect on my D40. And if you're looking for a camera that kind of helps you on your way to learning more about the camera and the camera settings, this guide mode is like amazing to have. So I know some people will ask, what is the best lens for the Nikon D3200? And unfortunately, there are no best lenses for this camera because it just really depends on your photography style. You know, I'm gonna recommend a 45, but some people will recommend the 35 1.8 GDX, or someone might even recommend a wide lens like a 17 to 50 2.8 or the 10 to 20. So there's a lot of best lenses for the D3200, but it just really depends on your type of photography and what you're doing too. But like I said earlier, I think the most versatile lens for the D3200, if you're just starting out and if you just bought the D3200 body only, I would say take a look at the 18 to 200 VR. I know you can find a few for under $100 used, depending on the condition it's in. I think if it's in really good condition, I wouldn't spend over $150 on the 18 to 200 VR lens. But if you can find one for well under $100, I would pick that one up for the D3200. That 18 to 200 on the D3200 is going to be great for traveling. It's going to be great for nature. It's going to be a really great overall lens, especially if you're just starting out. But if your budget can just stretch a little bit more, I would recommend the 17 to 50 2.8 lens from either Tamron or Sigma. I think the 17 to 50 2.8 lens for either Sigma or Tamron is probably the best lens for beginners or for someone that just got this camera because of the constant f2.8 aperture throughout all the focal lengths. So I hope this video helps those that have been looking at the D3200, or if you found your D3200 in storage. It's still a really capable camera in 2024 and 2025 and so on, and possibly for the next few years. The 24 megapixel sensor is amazing. You're gonna get amazing image quality from it. I think personally this camera's image quality is a lot better than the D3100s. If you are a current or previous owner of the D3200, I'd like to hear your experiences with the D3200 too. And also, please let others know what you think about the D3200. I just want to say thank you if you've gotten this far in this video. I know there's a lot of information about the D3200 in this video, so if you have any questions, like I said earlier, feel free to ask and I'll try my best to help. And if you found some of these tips in this video helpful, please hit that like and subscribe button because it does help my channel grow too. I just want to say thank you for watching. I really do appreciate it. See ya.